I think almost the only way really to explain realignment is to use an example. And I'll use an example that's about to come, that may be coming to pass now. So I think most people know that parole is a state function. Okay, you get released from a state prison, you end up on parole. They're looking at changing that from being a state function to becoming a county function. They don't just give you the service and say, okay, county, you're responsible for providing that. They also give you some dollars to do that. The question is, do they give you enough dollars, and do those dollars grow at the same pace that the requirement of the service grows? So they take and realign the service and also realign the dollars to provide that service. Now, there are some realignments that are more complicated than that, but I think just to understand that one at least will help to help you to understand what I'm about to talk about. I'm going to actually focus in on one of the pieces of realignment, which relates to public safety. You've heard a lot about social services and healthcare today, and of course economic development, but you haven't heard about public safety. And for those of you who are from community-based organizations, there's some very, very important changes, and also some possible opportunities here for changing the way that people are rehabilitated. I want to just cut back for a quick moment and look at 1991, because this has been done before. Back in 1991, under Pete Wilson, there was a massive, massive realignment from the state to the counties. Mental health, health and public health, and social services. Many aspects of those programs, not all, but many aspects of those programs were transferred down to the counties, and dollars went with them. How did they do it? They gave the counties the programs to administer and to run, and they also gave them some sales tax dollars and vehicle license fee dollars. So think back to the beginning of Schwarzenegger's era. Remember when he said, all right, we're going to go ahead and cut the vehicle license fee. Well, the reason he was so quick to do that is that it didn't fund, really, any state programs. It funded county programs. So that created, such a deal, right? A tough one to unwind. And, who really cares about services for poor people when it comes to having to pay, getting the opportunity to pay less when you buy your new car? So it was a real tough one. So anyway, there was a lot of changes in it as it went on. But the bottom line is that aside from the little shenanigans around the vehicle license fee, there we go, generally people have considered that 1991 realignment was a success. A little bit less sure on the healthcare side, but there's also been a lot of other changes in terms of healthcare for indigents. But in terms of mental health and some of the other areas, generally people have felt that giving the local control to the counties to run and administer these programs has largely been fairly successful. So now looking forward, there we go. So Governor Brown, here we go again, okay? How do you like that? There isn't actually a picture of a frame with him, so I stuck him in Pete Wilson's frame. So he's got a $5.9 billion realignment proposal on the table for the next fiscal year, and that's actually just phase one. Phase two, I'll explain in a second. So phase one on realignment is to take most of the rest of mental health, shift it down to the counties. Public health, the same thing. See, more administration of social services, though not all of it, and a big chunk of public safety. So that is a major, major changes. In order to pull this off, he does not actually have the money that he needs to do it. And this is where it gets very tricky, is that most of, and I won't go into the details, but most of the tax proposals that he hopes will end up onto the ballot in June in the special election are to fund the realignment. So there is a lot of anxiety around this, because what will happen if the voters say no? What happens with the programs? It's a very, very risky and dicey move right now. And there's also phase two, which really people haven't even begun to talk about, but it requires a whole nother level of realignment that has to do with federal health care reform being implemented, more people being shifted to state responsibility for health care off the indigent role and onto the Medi-Cal role, and then in exchange, then they're going to push more social services responsibility and child support down to the county. So that's another big switch. But let's talk about public safety specifically. And let me say, first off, that there are more questions than there are answers at this point. no matter how many times the LA County Board of Supervisors ask their CEO or their state lobbyists to try to say whether or not there's enough money in the kitty to fund the programs that are being proposed to shift down, the answer is we have no damn idea. Okay, it is kind of the Wild West right now on all of this stuff. And Sue Klein, who will end this program today, who is actually a probation officer and deeply involved with this, will add some color to that. That's very important. So the first piece of this public safety realignment is shifting all low-level offenders who are presently in state prison right now, okay, shifting them down to county responsibility, shifting dollars with them, 37,000 of them. Now they're talking about really just doing it prospectively, not taking somebody out of prison now and moving them down to jail, but these guys don't, these men and women don't stay in very long, so it's pretty quick that they start coming down to county jail. So on the one hand, sheriff thinks this is a pretty good idea. Kind of likes the idea of building a bigger empire. The sheriff's department, the deputy sheriff's union, doesn't think it's such a bad idea either, right? Because instead of having California prison guards monitoring this population, it would be deputy sheriffs. But here's where the devil gets crazy in the details. Nobody knows if there's going to be enough money to provide the services that are needed in the jails for these people. Health care, mental health, drug rehabilitation, all of those pieces. It's a huge question, and Sue knows much better more about this than I do, but it's really, it's risk opportunity in all of these. So if you can imagine more than 13,000 felons coming down to LA County in this proposal within the next 5 years. So some of the policy questions that sit out there and are being just discussed and debated. The sheriff is saying, well, maybe we should change the definition of what a violent and a serious offender is, because we want to make sure that if they really are violent and serious, they stay in state and fewer come down. That, I think, could have some serious effect because it changes sentencing guidelines and could really change things for certain people. Their sheriff is talking about looking at expanded use of electronic monitoring and work furloughs, moving more people out of jail and into the community. Pros and cons to that. Then I would say one of the more contentious pieces is right now the courts decide when somebody leaves, is released from prison. The sheriff wants responsibility for that. You'll see in a few minutes he also wants to take over parole, and that has some interesting ramifications. Another key part of this is adult parole. So right now, when you've basically got two systems, you've got your county jail system and your state prison system. So if it's a really low-level offense and somebody is sentenced to county jail for 6 months or 3 months or a year, whatever the case may be, when they're done, they end up on county probation. County probation, it certainly has its strengths and its weaknesses, but it does have a solid community-based program that does include a whole host of community-based services, drug rehabilitation, aftercare, a whole host of others that Sue will speak to, that parole does not so much have. So they want to shift, they want to eliminate state parole. So when somebody is released from state prison, they will no longer go on to parole, they will become a county responsibility. I think when this was first put on the table, it was assumed that would be a probation responsibility, and some folks saw that there was a real value to that. A lot of risks as well because it's very, very expensive. But again, the sheriff is looking at providing that service as well, so that's sort of a community debate at this point. And then, of course, there's the concern of there will be a real impact to the district attorney's workload and the public defender's workload on probation parole violations. So again, who knows whether there's enough money in the kitty to do this. And when it comes down to county, if there's not enough money to provide a service on public safety side, history shows they're going to cut it from somewhere else because the county cannot raise any of its own money. So that means there's going to be cuts to public health. That's going to mean there's going to be cut to mental health services. So it's a zero-sum game at the local government level. So another key question that comes up with this is that right now a probation caseload, for the most part, is not particularly violent. Those guys go on to parole. That would change. So what does that mean for probation officers who would be monitoring them? Do they need to be armed? Fewer armed now, but not very many. So that changes the nature of the workforce. So it's a huge paradigm shift in terms of the way that services are being delivered. What does it mean with respect to collective bargaining? Will the people who are hired to monitor these new parolees/probationers be represented by the unions here today, or will the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, a big heavyweight in the state, suddenly come in and start representing people at the local level? That has massive changes in the political dynamics at the local government level. But then on the opportunity side, perhaps this is an opportunity for new levels of rehabilitation for people that haven't really been available to them before. If there's enough money to do that, or if there's enough collaboration with community-based organizations, can that happen? And can, just as with the 1991 realignment, perhaps there be some real change? And I know in talking to a number of community-based organizations, they're interested in that possibility. Where could this go? I think that if this is jammed through, if this becomes part of the budget and these things are moved through quickly, a lot of this is going to be worked out on the fly, is really at the end of the day. But there are opportunities here. And then another piece is the juvenile justice piece. The state juvenile justice program, DJJ, has been dismantled piece by piece and shifted down to local government. They are now looking at shifting pretty much the rest of it down. And that's about 1,300 wards who would be shifted down to county responsibility. Some of those, as Sue will discuss, are violent. And it's not a good idea to house them together. You can see this picture I found online of how they're having to educate these two kids. It's tragic. So how do you fit that kind of a juvenile gangbanger, let's face it, into general population with other kids? So again, it's complicated, it's tough. But just as was discussed with the healthcare piece, you've got, your sickest people using most of the dollars, and that's the case here too. You've got your most violent juveniles using most of the dollars and requiring the most services. So it's a very difficult problem to solve. So do counties have the facilities to handle these juveniles who have committed violent crimes? It's a real question. And will there be enough funding to provide these kids the services that they need in order to be rehabilitated and reintegrated into society so we aren't just throwing away our kids? Another quick overview on a couple of pieces. Court security. Most of court security is handled by county sheriff's departments, the old court martial merger. They're looking at pushing the rest of that down to local government. There's some real concern on behalf of the courts as to how that would be implemented, and feeling that the judges might not have enough control if it's split between the counties, the sheriffs, and the judges. So that's a challenging issue. They're looking at perhaps some changes so that they can contract out those services. That's sure to create a fight on the part of the unions. CAL FIRE, there's the state provides, cities and counties provide most fire services, but there's a small piece that is done by the state, and that is CAL FIRE, where they provide EMS and fire protection in the rural areas. They want to shift that down to counties now. And there's a lot of questions because that's where the super tankers are. And the super tankers are handled because they're available to everybody. Who's going to own the super tanker? So there's a lot of strange questions there. And that really is the sum of the overview of the public safety realignment that's going on. It's obviously very complicated. There's a lot of policy questions that are left to be answered and worked out.